Good morning and welcome to our UBC Learning Circle, sharing Anishinaabe health research in good ways with Dr. Cindy Peltier, Anishinaabe. Today's conversation is presented in partnership with the Center for Excellence in Indigenous Health. We'd like to thank the First Nations Health Authority for generously funding the UBC Learning Circle and allowing us to have these conversations. Before we formally begin, I'd like to acknowledge with respect and gratitude that I'm joining you from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Please feel free to introduce yourselves and the nation you're calling in from in the chat box. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sarain Squawkin. I'm the Learning Circle Manager. I'm Syilx Okanagan on my mother's side and Hickory, Apache, and Belgian on my father's side. I'll be your moderator for today's discussion, and joining us working behind the scenes is our program assistant, Kira Lumley. She'll be in the background interacting with everyone in the chat. And finally, before we get into today's discussion, I'll provide a gentle heads up that the topics covered may be sensitive or emotionally triggering. Please make sure that you're looking after yourself, and if at any point in time you feel like you need to talk to a friend, elder, counselor, or family member, don't hesitate to do so. We have some prompts in the chat for you if you need additional support. Now I'll turn it over to Cindy to introduce herself.
Bonjour. Kenogoya. Scobidabno que dijnikas. Name dodem. Wikwemkong minwa nbising donjava. Nishnabe que ndao. I'm so pleased to be here today. I want to say good morning or good afternoon, depending on your geographical location. Miigwech to Sarain and the UBC Learning Circle for inviting me to share a little bit about what I've learned about disseminating research in good ways. And I'll explain a little bit more about that during the presentation. Just to give you a little bit of background about myself and the two projects that I'll be presenting today. They are based from my home communities. So in my introduction that I shared in Anishinaabe, I shared that I'm from Wikwemkong unceded territory on Manitoulin Island. And I now live in Nipissing First Nation, close to North Bay, Ontario. That's where I'm currently living. I'm teaching at Nipissing University. I've been there since 2016, and I'm so pleased to be invited to participate today. Chimiigwech. So as I shared, I was going to share with you today a little bit about research dissemination or sharing or knowledge translation of research findings in good ways. But I wanted to clarify that when someone says they're going to do something in a good way, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are thinking their way is better. In Anishinaabe, the term wewene refers to looking after something properly. And from this perspective, sharing in good ways means looking after community stories in ways that can help others. So it's not putting someone else's views below yours or saying that yours aren't any better. Sharing in good ways means looking after future generations. I'll begin by acknowledging that the Manitoulin Island or Nido-Minising and the Nbising Anishinaabe communities, I want to acknowledge them for their ongoing support. Today, I'll share two examples of knowledge translation activities created in partnership with these communities I fondly refer to as my home communities. Because I'm a teacher, I thought it might be appropriate to share some learning objectives for today. An overall objective might be to examine research through creative media adaptations. To do this, we're going to use what I've called the 4 directions learning cycle. This work blends Nicole Bell's medicine wheel pedagogy and Kolb's experiential learning model. So you'll see some of the terms in there that both First Nations scholars use, but also a non-Indigenous scholar, Kolb, uses in his work. In this way, we begin in the East, where learners will see a film or view elements of an online micro-credential. We move to the South, where learners will relate to what they've experienced. In this case, the voices of Anishinaabe sharing their health experience. In the West, learners gain some understanding of the steps taken to turn research findings into creative, accessible formats. So making this wider, the accessibility of the information wider than just an academic audience. Then in the northern direction, learners revisit the project and learn how to act on community priorities for the future, or at least consider that. But what is an adaptation? Well, for today's purposes, I'm defining adaptation as a process of transforming stories, poems, or research findings into different mediums. I'll share two examples. One, that film. There's the film poster on your right-hand side, featuring Anishinaabe of Nidolminising, or Manitoulin Island. Then I'll give you a short tour of the micro-credential created in partnership with Nipissing First Nation, which I'll sometimes refer to as NFN, just because it's a shortened version, so you'll know who I'm talking about when I say NFN. It's important to situate these stories on the land. So to give you a sense of where Manitoulin Island is in relation to the rest of Ontario, the province that I'm located in, I share this map to honor the lands of my ancestors on my late father's side. The brown sections that you see are the 7 Manitoulin First Nations who graciously participated in this study with me. To quote some of my home community's history, the people of Wikwemkong live on Odawa Manis and the surrounding islands in Lake Huron. These lands are unceded, meaning the people have retained these lands for our future generations, so they can continue to be Anishinaabe. We have not relinquished any of our rights to any of the lands in the Great Lakes Basin to any nation. We continue to govern the waters, air, and lands, including the islands, as our ancestors have done since time immemorial. These lands are the homelands of the people of the Three Fires Confederacy, the Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi. I will share the first adaptation of research with you. Bear with me while I stop sharing and share from my other screen. One moment. What do you think cancer is?
I'm not as invincible as I thought I was. I'm not on the list of untouchables. I am vulnerable. And since I am vulnerable, let's work a little harder at keeping my body, my mind, my health stronger. It's just a growth like a weed. Now, eventually that grows big. People need to see that, and people need to see that, yes, I'm going to fight this thing. And it's not going to cover me up. I'm not going to go hide somewhere.
But it kind of scared me. Like, I didn't feel sick or anything. There was just something, I don't know how to explain it.
Don't give it power. By power, I mean that it's going to take over your life. It's going to destroy your family. You're going to be angry, bitter. Your family's going to be super solicitous. Or your family won't want to talk about it and they'll ignore you. Don't give it that power to do all these things.
They still had to take it out through surgery. This was real.
Totally opposite of what it should have been.
I couldn't explain it, but something was wrong. I was always here for pain, but they didn't believe me. Mammogram, colonoscopy,
Oh my God.
MRI, CAT scan, blood test, so many tests. Hoping, waiting, praying. Without a tissue diagnosis, they won't say that it's cancer. No diagnosis yet? You're not trying hard enough.
My dad had cancer. I asked him one time, what is it? What is it? And I don't think he knew how to explain it. What he said was Jayish. Jayish was how he. Jayish is something that's no good.
They say hindsight is clarity.
I can feel what you're asking. I can feel it. Cancer is one of the most devastating sicknesses that we have.
Oh my gosh. She got cancer.
It was fast and aggressive. Why are you back in my body?
It's a reflection of some risks that we put on ourselves and then some inherent risks that are beyond our control.
One day it wasn't there, then it was there. Is this a mistake? This isn't for me. Stigma, guilt, fear. Shame.
Oh, it's just that not knowing, not knowing. I just as soon know right now.
They say hindsight is clarity.
It's insidious within in its actions, and how it eats the person alive.
Is this my fault? What did I do? Will I survive? Will my family be okay? Learn this system to save your life. I started reading and tried to understand, but I don't think there's enough education. It's something new to Anishinaabe. It devastates them and they don't know how to deal with it. I don't know anything about cancer. Who's supposed to tell me these things?
And as a people, when we look at sicknesses, we talk to that sickness because it's alive.
I think these bad cells woke up in me. Something triggered them. Maybe it was how I lived. Maybe it was beyond my control.
I would say it comes primarily from an imbalance within the system that isn't attended to.
And I don't know what triggers them or anything. I'm thinking that they were there and then something triggered them. I think it has something to do with our environment. And the things we eat, the things we breathe in.
It was a growth like a weed. If ignored, it would grow. Cancer does not belong in my body. Sometimes you can get rid of it early with our traditional medicines. Sometimes the root is so deep, somebody has to cut it out.
Because things happened so fast, everything was Western. You know, from the time I was diagnosed till I went, see the specialist, had the MRI done. Everything happened so fast, and before I knew it, it was surgery. So I mainly had to rely on Western medicine.
This was the only forward to me. The only option that I knew about. I had no choice. If I didn't do these things, I was going to be sick. I heard the teaching that we always have a choice.
It's up to you. You have to decide what you want for your health. So it's up to you. Quinoa, it's up to you.
I had shared with my doctor that I went to see a healer. There was a sense of respect, and he never asked what I was taking. Having that affirmation from the Western medical side let me make my choice freely without resistance.
That the healer or the doctor or whoever is not the one who heals them, but they help facilitate that. The healing is within them and their relationship with the Creator.
I go to bed at 2, and I'm up at 4 or 5, you know, and just up. You can't sleep because in your mind, when you're sleeping, you're still thinking of this cancer. It's not letting you sleep. You know, you sometimes can't enjoy the day because that's on your mind.
Fatigue, loss of strength, pain, and a PICC line for my medicine. I tried to live normally and taking care of myself and my family. I tried not to worry about having cancer.
You know, leaving my family behind, possibly young children, you know, having to navigate the transportation system on my own, getting to a community that I don't know, walking into a building that is foreign to me and doing that on my own, and then not necessarily trusting the system because there's been atrocious things that have happened in the past.
I had a hard time talking because I had so much chemo. My memory was affected and my words didn't come out right. When the pain was bad, I wondered if that was the end. There's no time to think. It's all very overwhelming. Is this a mistake? This isn't for me. It's something new to Anishinaabe. I don't think there's enough education. I was so mad one day. Thank you for the shittiest day ever. When you're not in balance, you can't get rid of these cells. They can lead to inflammation, a disease, a lack of immune response.
Don't give it that power to do all these things.
Try to get that negative away, because if you hold on to that negative, it brings you down. It don't help you or your family. It wants to be honest and be positive, you know.
I thought about it after. Okay, I take that back. You look at that illness and ask, what is it? What are you bringing to me?
You learn to love more, you know. You love life a little bit more than you did before. You love the people more that are in your life. And not only that, you have, as a whole, you love life, you know, you love the people in it.
Someone said we begin to die the minute we're born. Death is a part of life. Who knows why the Creator thins his herd? Another saying says, we must all be prepared to give up those we love or die first. Take time to mourn, take time to remember. The pain you feel is once balanced by someone's joy when that baby was born. The loss you feel today will be replaced by good, long-lasting memories. Is there a message here? Yeah, treat others like this is your last day above ground.
So thinking back to that 4 directions learning cycle in the South, we focus now on relating and reflection. I'll give you a moment to share any thoughts of your own on the film. What stood out for you? Maybe how does the story resonate with your own experience? You can share any of your responses in the chat. And if you feel like you want to do that, Serene's mentioned to me earlier that I'll be able to view them later without names attached. So chimiwech if you wish to share. A short moment to do that, and we'll move on. So when I think about moving into the West, I think, okay, this is the time where we connect some of the dots, and that part of the learning cycle provides background or understanding about how the film was adapted. So how do we go about doing that kind of thing? Well, I'll share my story. When I started the process, it didn't occur to me how long that would take. And now I have deep respect for those who can turn novels or books into films to share with wider audiences, you know, distilling all that information down into something that can be visually presented so that it's accessible to more than just folks who are going to read a 300-page thesis. So my first meeting with Shannon Lucas, the film's director, was in June of 2017. He agreed to meet to discuss the project, and I'll admit I was a little bit excited to have someone interested to work with me on that. I began by sharing my entire thesis with him. At that point, I had to give him credit for not running away. It was a tall order, and the project was stalled for some time while we decided how we were going to proceed. Lesson 1 learned: too much information isn't necessarily better. We would have many more conversations over the next year and a half before things started to take shape. In January 2019, I was browsing a copy of River Woman by award-winning poet Katharina Vermette. And as it would turn out, that little book of poetry had quite an impact. With a brainwave and summoning a little bit of bravery, I reached out to her to ask for some advice. And to be honest, I did ask if I could commission a poem based on a collective story and the results of my thesis. She was kind in her response. While Katharina couldn't take on the project at the time, she did share some words of encouragement, and I'll always remember them. She said, "I think you know the stories best of all, and you'd be the best person to tease out the poetry from those stories." The artist's work is best when it's personal and it comes from the heart, soul, or spirit. Lesson 2, learn, take some risks. I decided to try my hand at writing and went back through the interviews, picking out some of the most salient messages and teachings. For the poetry to be truly meaningful, though, I did use the words of the participants. So if the visuals didn't share anything for you, certainly the words and hearing the voices of those Anishinaabe women would stir some type of new learning for you. It did for me. Even when I watched it a second and third time, I'm still hearing their voices. Much later, it wasn't until I went to a conference much later on that I learned from a research perspective, this is a methodological approach called poetic analysis. So while I guess I can take credit for saying, oh, I was doing poetic analysis, I didn't know I was doing that at the time. It's important to note too that I trusted our Anishinaabe knowledge to guide the process. So using Anishinaabe when shared by the women provided essential guidance for decision making. So you heard a little bit of it throughout the film. There's lots more in my research paper. But lesson 3, learned, trust that our teachings and our language can show the way. So this poem reflects one part of the cancer journey that you heard in the film. It holds teachings given by our elders. And one in particular, one elder shared, "Kam nadapnan akazolin," means to take illness in a good way. That's a really different way of looking at cancer itself. So I'll read the poem that I pulled those salient messages from. Acceptance. Take illness in a good way. Look at cancer and ask, what are you bringing to me? I was so mad one day, but I took that back. You taught me a lesson. Our people adapt. Appreciate that good life. Take time to heal, rest, and pray. Look after that good life. Cancer won't hold us down. Looking at, again, in the West, when we're gaining some perspective on how this work was done, I've broken it down into a few steps. So step 1 was the development phase. It occurred from about January to May 2019. And, while it took a lot longer than that, that's when we really knew, okay, this is the path we're going to follow. Shannon worked from the poetic analysis to create a storyboard and a new vision for the film. From there, things really started rolling. We moved to step 2, where we took a trip to Manitoulin and Wikwamkong to scout film locations. Since Shannon had never been to Manitoulin, we visited, and he was only able to capture from my descriptions and what he could find on the internet. So being on the land was critical. Lesson 4 learned. Being on the land would be the key to the film's creation. We began our work at sunrise and shot most of the B-roll footage before noon. That's the local scenery that you saw, the shots of the land and the water. To help with the film's props, I reached out to a friend and colleague of mine, Dr. Renee Bedard of Doki's First Nation. Among her many talents, she's an artist, and she painted all the artifacts that you saw in the film, with the exception of the first painting. That one was done by OG Cree artist Mitchell Ellen of Brunswick House First Nation. So I want to acknowledge those folks. In step 3, we reached out to Jody Taylor, a Nipissing First Nation actress who portrays the woman on the path. Shannon, Jody, and a very small crew shot the entire film in one day on a local walking trail. Step 4 was editing, and Jody provided the voiceover for some of the poetry in the film. In keeping with Indigenous community-based research principles, I kept the participants and the communities involved throughout that entire process and beforehand, of course. So step 5, I would say, involved asking and asking again for permission to share their stories as a film. On November 2nd, 2020, we celebrated with an online screening hosted by Weekwamkong's Devajmajig Storytellers. While we would have loved to have had that in-person screening, COVID didn't allow us to do that at the time. But it was a good day, attended by a lot of folks, and I was pretty happy. So they say at the end, that's a wrap. But I want to acknowledge that this project itself wasn't possible without the support of many. The project was funded by CIHR and Nipissing University. But again, without the commitment and kind support of friends and community members dedicating their skills, time, and willingness to work on a very, very small budget, this wouldn't have happened. So when I think about that northern direction and this project, I think that the film is one way that future generations can learn about cancer experiences of those Anishinaabe Kwayok from Manitoulin, and perhaps pull some of the threads and help them learning about that process, maybe if it happens to someone close to them. The project also reflects the desire of those women to help others by sharing their own stories. A second example of adaptation was turning research findings from another project into a micro-credential called Widok Tadyang, promoting health and wellness in Anishinaabe communities. So this particular project overlapped with the other one slightly. It began in early 2017 from conversations with Nipissing First Nation health leaders, administrators, and elders about community priorities for wellness. I learned about the community philosophy called Widok Tadyang, translated loosely as we are helping one another. So Widok Tadyang is also the name for a community developed multi-sector model of support for community members that's delivered through what they call a no wrong door approach. And that'll be explained a little bit more as we go along. But this project, also funded by CIHR, aimed to translate the stories of the Nipissing Anishinaabe to support and inform that Widok Tadyang model, which ultimately is aimed at enhancing protocols, promoting integration across NFN's departments, programs, and services. So trying to bring everyone to the table to help once, instead of sending someone door to door for assistance. The community always expected that our knowledge translation plan would improve the cultural safety of the Widok Tadyang model. Essentially, it involved hearing the voices of NFN members concerning what wellness means to them and what members believed the appropriate kind of help to facilitate wellness. Since the land is so central to our ways of knowing and being, also creation stories, and I would argue for wellness, it's important to situate Nipissing First Nation also. So I shared this map of NFN to honor the territory of my ancestors on my mother's side. The people of Nipissing have lived on their ancestral lands and in harmony with Lake Nipissing from time immemorial. To quote a recent Nipissing First Nation monument that was erected. It stated Chief Shabgijik was a signatory to the Robinson-Huron Treaty of 1850, ensuring his people would have set aside for their exclusive use and protection all that land and its resources lying north of Lake Nipissing and its main waterways. So sharing, because this project was done with a community with an end goal in mind, we had to tailor the knowledge translation process in a number of ways. So I've kind of made a slide here of several different initiatives that we tried to share with community members in artistic formats. We didn't do that alone. So we did this in a variety of ways with the help of Drawing Change, a Vancouver-based organization focused on providing unique visuals for organizational development. So I have up in the left-hand corner, the top left, is a traditional kind of final report. We provided short recommendation reports for program managers, ones that we shared with them that they could have in hand, and then the far right would be maybe another program manager receiving something that was accessible online. The large banner that you see at the bottom reflected an infographic of our final meeting with the Community Advisory Committee and several guests. So it was in this research dissemination phase that NFN requested a training initiative for staff development around that Widok-Tajang model. The micro-credential, developed in partnership with them, served, I would say, both the community's training needs, or I hope that it does, and Nipissing University's need to develop a learning opportunity in response to the Truth and Reconciliation's calls to action 23 and 24. Drawing Change also helped us to produce 2 visual models as a creative response to our original research questions. From our first research question, how do NFN citizens understand and experience wellness, 5 themes emerged. Working from the innermost circle, we have connectedness, living the medicine wheel, belonging, and experiencing colonialism. The 5th theme that we kind of pulled out was depicted in a second visual model, which I'll share a little later on, called Reclaiming Nipissing Anishinaabe Ways to Wellness. Our work in knowledge translation integrated these 5 themes into an interactive, self-directed online offering to strengthen capacity for understanding strengths-based health and wellness from an Anishinaabe perspective. Though the micro-credential itself is based on NFN's knowledge and experience, we believe it can extend to working with many other Indigenous communities. There's some common teachings, common themes there. I think it would serve us well if I shared just a few quotes to give you a sense of what participants said around those themes before we get into the micro-credential itself. So, connectedness. The center of the model represents a person's connection to creation, often manifested through spirit, identity, or who we are, and values, what's important to us. So for this participant, wellness involved connecting to ancestral knowledge. I feel strongly that our ancestors had a lot of faith that things would change, that we would learn to live in a good, healthy way with strong moral character. their example of overcoming hardship would prevail. So just giving you a sense, one example of what participants shared around these themes. Moving outward, living the medicine wheel was our second theme. The participants' response here basically reflects that health is more than physical, and there's sometimes some misunderstandings that are picked up in what we define as these four broad aspects. So when you use the word mental, people thought you were mentally ill. Then it's to try to get that information out there. So it's just understood to be part of our health. So if we're not happy, if we're sad, if we're depressed, if we kind of know why, but we don't quite know how to get out of that state of mind, that's unwellness, of course. It's just the way I think society's always thought of health as only physical. Getting to that broader thinking. In coming back home to NFN, this person came to learn why family and community are integral to wellness. When we moved back here, trying to feel a part of the community was a challenge. People look at you and ask, who are you? Who's your mother? You know, that's the first thing they want to get into. You go anywhere else, they don't start asking who your mother is, who your father is, or your grandmother. Once you're here, then you understand why. It's such a small community, and everyone wants to know everybody. Intentionally depicted as a grayed out nondescript circle, experiencing colonialism reflects a background influence, but ever present. So this participant contemplated the abuse and colonial thinking imposed on generations of Anishinaabe. The residential schools were such a successful thing in this area. There was certainly many cases of abuse that came out of there, but abuse in such a way that they felt fortunate that they were able to go there, and they're happy with that Jesus and God were brought into their life, not realizing the abuse that even that mindset gave them. So, you know, it's a different perspective, different way of looking at that. Our second research question explored that concept of helping. Because we were looking at that Widok Tajang model, it was important for community leaders to know what's the appropriate kind of help to facilitate wellness. Well, we really focused our analysis on recommendations for wellness. That's how it ended up being drawn out. And these recommendations spoke to a greater theme of reclaiming and releasing Anishinaabe ways, which ended up being a fifth theme again. So this participant captured the thoughts of many when speaking about returning to traditional forms of governance. It comes back to governing ourselves and using this adopted system. We need to go back to our teachings. We need to continue to educate our young with all these great teachings that we have from our ancestors, and to make ourselves in that way. Instead of following the system, we need to break free from it and assert our own self-determination in different ways. It may not look exactly like it did before colonization, but we can't keep going this way because it's obviously creating too much division. So, you know, in building that model, the NFN community understands Widok Tajang as a form of self-determination, a philosophy of care, and a way of being. And that's how we frame the micro-credential. So you'll have to bear with me again while I try to share the micro-credential with you without a whole bunch of technical difficulty. So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment while I get this going on my other page. And then I'm sharing this with you. 1 moment. Oh. Serene, will you give me a thumbs up if I'm sharing the micro-credential page? Wedge. So the micro-credential that was co-developed is now on eCampus Ontario's Open Library. So it says read book, and it very much reads like a book, but I've tried to create a way that it would be interactive. So you'll see that there are different ways that you can interact with the knowledge instead of just reading the material. So one of the first things is I wanted to show you how that model fits with the micro-credential, the model that I've been using for our webinar today. So in the East, again, learners see an initial experience usually by watching a video and working through some relevant exercises. Moving into the South, learners relate and reflect on new learning from their own experiences. So always going back and relating it. How does this relate to me and what I know? It's not until we get to the West where learners begin to understand how those experiences or the videos relate to existing theory and knowledge. Because it's a course, of course, we have some academic pieces in there, not many, because we want to make it accessible for everyone. And then in the North, learners get to try out what they've learned. So with NFN, we were able to create some practice learning scenarios, and there's some test pieces that go along with that. And I use the word test very loosely. We have 3 learning guides. Your learning guide for Module 1 is Macaw, or the bear. The Jijak, the crane, is our guide for Module 2. And then we have Migazet, or eagle, is the learning guide for Module 3. I just thought I'd share the welcome video from Chief Gima Scott McLeod. And he kind of frames, I guess it frames why he thought it was important to participate in this kind of training.
Aninkinawea, Zogabwe Dijnakas, Bizing Dunjaba. Hi everybody, my name is Chief Scott McLeod of Nipissing First Nation, and I want to welcome you to our territory and participating in the micro-credential program. One of the things I think that people need to know about Indigenous communities, and if one was to work in our community and understand the needs of our community, I think you have to look at the history of our community and some of the things that contribute to the different and more specific ailments that plague our communities. And those could be, based out of traumas of residential school, or, just some of the legislation that created divisions and segregation and biases to our communities. So if you better understand some of those things and you're more trauma informed about the individual that you're trying to help, I think you get a better understanding of the needs that our people require when trying to heal from certain things in their lives. So I think it boils down to a really good understanding of not only the individual, but the community itself and the historic, roadmap that got First Nations to where they are and some of the things that they endured along the way.
So because it's a book, we'll go back up to the table of contents. I just want to show a few things. One thing that we were very lucky to be able to have Elder Evelyn McLeod help us with language. So there are opportunities throughout to learn the language, a little bit of the language around this program, around wellness, around what's important. So here's the first term.
We dok ta diang. We dok ta diang. We dok ta diang.
And you could click on any one of these, practice saying the words along with her, gives you a little sense of your own learning about the language. And then using an H5P tool, you could record yourself. So record your pronunciation practice, play it back. You can hear yourself saying the words. Doesn't sound right, you go back and re-record. One thing that I want to alert people to, or have them recognize, that nothing is saved or recorded, nothing will be stored. This is just for your own practice, but it's a way to have you interact with the pieces. So don't be shy if you wanted to go in and try it. No one's going to listen to your recordings, they're for you. That goes for anything else that you type into the program. It doesn't get saved. It's a way to for you to think. Some people like to write while they think. So I'm not going to go through everything, but I want to highlight a few pieces. So module 1 goes from the very general to the specific. So, the first parts of the module reflect Indigenous people's health and learning about that. And then it goes into learning about First Nation health model, defining health from First Nation perspective. And then we get into bringing it closer to being on the land here. What does that look like? And if I click on, my apologies. If we click on Connection 7, I spoke about the importance of creation stories. And yeah, I'm very grateful that Terry Dokis Ba, the late Terry Dokis, shared a creation story with Nipissing University, and he allowed us to share that here. I asked him for permission to add some visuals around what he was talking about in the film. So it's an updated version of that with visuals, and he passed away. But we're so grateful when elders share their knowledge, and we have permission to use the knowledge and share it with others. So miigwech to Terry for that. Again, if you say you recorded your reflection response about that creation story, what you learned about it, I'm not collecting it. I'm not going to read it, neither will anyone at the university, but it is a way for you to, share your thoughts in more than one way. You can speak it or you can write it. So a number of entry points for learning. Lots of people learn in different ways. There's not just one way. Connection 8, I just want to show that it really hones in now on this perspective of this community that asked for this piece. So you'll notice we're going into these themes that I already kind of gave you a little bit of heads up about. But at the same time, while we were doing this micro-credential, the community was just releasing a new documentary called Bidajwan, or Force of Water. And it's about one of our language speakers here who has since passed, but it really shares the impact of her knowledge. I would invite anyone to go and watch that. It's quite impactful. But what I did was I pulled some of clips from that documentary that fit with the themes and what they're talking about. So I'm just going to share that so that you hear from the community, not just from my research, what these themes mean.
Anishinaabe, it's more than just a language. I never knew I was missing something till I started learning Anishinaabe. It fills something that you never knew was missing.
It's a connection to who I am as a person. It's a connection to all of my relations, to my ancestors in the spirit world. It's connected to the plants in the forest. It's connected to the land where we came from.
It's the instruction manual on how everything around this lake works, like our dialect specifically. And as the dialects get more broader, I'll go as far as saying like the Great Lakes. Like our language explains the Great Lakes in an in-depth that no other language has, simply because nobody else has put in the time that we have as Anishinaabe people around these lakes.
When you hear the name of a plant in the language, a part of it tells you what it does, or it tells you a signature of its doctrine. And when you hear like about an animal, it's speaking about what they do in their habitat. So it's the language directly from the land.
Anishinaabe is vitally important to our identity as people. Since the introduction of the Indian Act in 1876, a lot of that has been decimated from our community. And so what we're doing as a government is trying to take what's left of our language and language speakers and bring them up to the forefront in creating an environment where we can once again have Anishinaabe front and center of our community and leading the way in our culture.
We're from this earth as much as a deer is from this earth, as much as a fish is from this earth. We are the environment, we are the land, just like a tree is, just like this rock is. Like we're from this, and we can't separate that. And that language really grounds us in that. It really shows us our relationship with the land.
So just going back to the table of contents again, scrolling through. Just to share a little bit about Module 2. Module 2 really explores that concept of cultural humility and the cultural safety continuum, understanding a little bit more about yourself and how you fit into that helping relationship. I would say Module 3 culminates with a practical focus, so on service delivery in particular, and really bringing learners into what Widok Tadjong means for Nipissing First Nation. Connection 2 explains how that service delivery model moves from a colonial to a relational approach, more in line with traditional way of life. And I'm going to let community members speak for themselves with just a short clip. I'm almost finished here.
Our grandmothers used to put their heads together, and our grandfathers, but more our grandmothers, I would argue, used to put their heads together to solve a problem. A family was in crisis, somebody would cook some food, somebody would make sure the kids were cared for. You know, there was this sort of natural way of wrapping ourselves around the problem in the family. And that it was that model really that we wanted to try and rebuild or reconstitute.
We lost the old way. Like we take on that colonialism. That took away our way of life, because we all looked after each other. And we, I don't know what my clan is. My mother was Shopgijik. And, but all the Goulets lived on that side of the village. You ever notice? So when somebody got a moose or a deer or whatever, had some fish, like everybody over there got part of that. And same with all the MacLeods down the other end, their clan. And the ones in between, like fishers and things like that were done. You were looked after. And I know my grandmother Goulet, she raised a couple of young girls too. Everybody just adopted people into their family. Like, it just came automatically. You didn't even think, well, I'm going to go there and help this poor person. Like, you know, it was just automatic. And not young, that's what they call that, the way we live. It was just part of life. If you saw a need, you went there. And then that was taken over by the homemakers. Your grandmother, that's how that was. Before they had the band office, the homemakers were the program that did everything. Social, medical, for medical trips, they provided money. And they gave money to outside agencies, Cancer Society, different ones. And the chief would go, when they had the Santa Fund on TV, every year the chief would go and present a check to them from the homemakers. Like, but they didn't say homemakers, they said from Nipissing First Nation.
We heard a lot about people, you know, in sort of traditional times, when there was a need in the community, people would come together to help each other. And, you know, back in those days, we had limited services in all of our communities, and Nipissing was the same. And so people had to find ways to support each other, to help them to, you know, get back on their feet. Or
so I'm going to stop that there. And the other part that the micro-credential does is go into a chance for you to try out what you're learning. And if you could see that, it would look like a learning scenario and some questions throughout where you'd click and answer, and then a small quiz. I'm just going to share my screen for the last part of this presentation. Thank you for your. So in the South, for our purposes today, we'll take a bit of time again to reflect on what you've seen in that micro-credential, what you've heard, what you felt. Again, I'll give you a few moments to share what stood out for you, or how does that community's experience resonate with your own? Maybe you have some similar stories. I'd invite you to share any responses in the chat. Moving to the West, just to share an overview here quickly. We worked from August 2018 to January 2019 to gather those stories from 90 people from Nipissing First Nation, 30 on-reserve members called Eagles, 30 off-reserve members we called Bears, and then 30 staff members we called Cranes. And they became our learning guides. At the community presentation, again, we were asked to develop some kind of training initiative In steps 3 and 4 here, we work together with the community to apply to the province for some funding to be able to offer and develop the micro-credential. Number 4 was really important to me. I mean, no one asked us to do that, but I wanted to make sure that we developed a memorandum of understanding. Not a lot of times do you offer courses at universities and allow communities to participate in revenue sharing. And we wanted to make sure that that was done. You can't ask a community to participate, then ask them to pay for the knowledge that was already theirs to begin with. So being very mindful of how we involve communities and then how we honor them all the way through. We co-developed the content, always going back and asking, is this okay? What do you think? Step 5 involved that going back and forth to develop that. Step 6 is what we're in right now. It's the open sharing of that micro-credential online. So it's done in 2 ways. One, through open learning. You can go on and try it out. If you want a micro-credential badge from the university and be acknowledged for that and share it in your portfolio, you can register, formally register, and you will earn a badge. So from the northern direction again, and we'll end there, the learning cycle. We consider ways that courses like this can influence the actions of a new generation of nurses, social workers, or community workers. Miigwech to everyone for participating, listening, and being patient with my fumbling with technology today. I really appreciate everyone who joined and listened. I'll turn it back to Serene, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Miigwech.
Lim, thank you so much. That was really great. I learned so much, and I feel like we're gonna get a few questions here. I have a few here. I'll start with the first question. How many hours on average would it take to complete the micro-credential?
Okay, so I had a test person work through it, and it takes about 30 hours. That's watching everything, reading everything, and doing the what I'll call assignments. But you'll notice that when you go and you say you want to get a badge, the Microsoft forms that you would fill out, it's not really marked. We quickly look to make sure that, a person actually participated in the components, and you can tell by looking, and then we give you your badge. So some people are quicker readers, quicker writers, and sometimes things are already familiar to people, but on average, I think it would take about 30 hours.
Great, thank you. And then our next question is there a cost associated with the micro-credential?
Because it's shared 2 ways. One is the open learning. There's no cost for you to go and take a look. If you want the badge part of it, there is a cost. And I shared in on the poster, I think there's a few links that you can check it out and you can see the price there. Again, because we're just starting out, it's just been released, it's a learning process. So whatever the cost is, we'll look at how we're going to negotiate that going forward. One thing I do want to mention, though, for those who are interested, community members, again, we don't charge community members to take that. So there's a little bit of a verification process where people would have to prove that they belong to NFN, and NFN is helping us with that. Once they got that, information, they would not be charged, and they would be able to have their badge, their digital badge.
Great. And then our next question is, are there team or group facilitation questions that complement this course? This person's asking, they're a team of registered dietitians, and they feel like this would be a great professional development to work on together. Just wondering, I'll repeat the question. Are there team or group facilitation questions that complement this course?
You know what? I think it's something that people would, because it's self-paced, you would go in and work at your own pace. There aren't any team questions, but what say you could treat it like a book club where folks, work at their own pace, and then you'd set a date, maybe, I don't know, end of November for module 1. Let's get together and talk. You could pull some of those questions out of the already existing micro-credential and just have a chat about what did those things mean to you? How maybe what people had pulled from their own learning. And I think there's ways to do it, and I'd be happy to help think that through.
Great. And then we have a few people saying it's beautiful work. I think it's really grounding and just like a great way to learn about the Nipissing and Anishinaabe ways of being. And I guess my personal question would be, what was your inspiration to start both the film and the micro-credential?
Thanks for that question, Serene. And I never mentioned it. Sometimes I get a bit teary when I talk about my late father. So my dad passed away in 2009 from cancer. We've had unfortunately, many experiences with cancer. So both my parents had that, both my in-laws, and we're currently going through cancer experience as I speak. My husband was with his mother attending an appointment. So this is an ongoing issue. But my dad he used Indigenous healing in his own healing path. And that was the impetus for me to go back and do my doctorate. I thought, people need to learn about what Indigenous healing does for our people and what it means to heal. I'll tell you just a little small story about that. I presented my work while a doctoral student, and that was before they took comments down. So there were some kind of nasty comments put into the CBC's comments page, and they really bothered me. I really think that one of the comments was something like, "Oh, your dad passed away, so obviously that healing or the method didn't work." That's precisely why I think people need to learn about Indigenous healing and what that, how that serves our people more than a physical cure. There's lots that goes into that, and working to get those stories out, what it does for people, how it helps families, how what healing is. It doesn't always necessarily mean a cure, but it could. So yeah, I just think about that. And for the Widok Taja, it was there was a funding call, but it was also me moving back here and learning about some of the work that was being done in my mom's home community, and how we might be able to work from a community priority. So we went in with an idea. And I think it's important for folks who are on the call to hear that sometimes your ideas aren't necessarily what the community wants to study or what their priorities are. So being willing to be flexible and understanding The community has to lead the way. So that was one of my biggest lessons out of the Wido Tajam project. You could go in all, oh, this is my proposal, this is what I want, there's funding, would you be interested? That's like kind of back that up. That's not how we do things anymore. So yeah, it was a learning experience. I think my colleagues would agree. They're non-Indigenous and they wanted that, let's apply for this call. Sure, but it might not look like what you originally thought.
Definitely. Thank you so much for sharing your inspiration for both the film and the micro credential. I know it's speaking from the heart really can be hard sometimes, but I know it's really meaningful, and I appreciate you sharing. And I know people in my family also have experienced cancer and whatnot, and I think just knowing that we have the option to access Indigenous medicines or treatment and whatnot just makes quite a difference, just because like it can relieve a lot of like that stress that just Western medicine can't, and I appreciate you sharing that. And I'm sorry that you got those comments. I know that's not very nice, and not very like, it doesn't really add value to anything, right? And I think it's really great that you're the micro credential is a way to share a lot of the ways of being and ways of knowing, both on the land and language for the Anishinaabe people, and specifically the Nipissing community. So I think it's really great. And what was your biggest takeaway from either the film or the micro credential?
I guess the biggest takeaway would be that the community, they really lead the way in how they want these pieces delivered. Because I have a teaching background, I guess some would argue, hey, you're not publishing in this way. Well, for me, and I'm not knocking anyone else, but my goal here is to make sure that anything that I learn about from communities, that it goes back to them, but it goes back in ways that are more than, here's the report, or here's my thesis, or here's, an academic article that, frankly, I don't think community members are going to be able to access that in terms of, sometimes you have to have a library. Some things are open access, but sometimes you have to have a library privileges to be able to get to those articles. It's just not accessible. So trying to find ways that information can be shared and given back that is truly meaningful. That's basically my biggest takeaway.
That's great. I think we see that a lot with a lot of our researchers' work not being accessible to the community after doing community research. So I think that's a great resource that you created for your community and just for Indigenous people in general, like, and setting precedent for other ways of sharing your research and whatnot. So I think that's really great. I think we have another question here. Just in the chat. Do you think Western medicine could learn more about how to help people live with disease or versus focus on cure? Might this help with decisions around medical care for people who are at end of life?
Yes, I do. But I want to acknowledge that, there are some physicians. I just remember one person in particular. I mean, more than one, but one man's words I remember, physician's words, and he spent a lot of time in our community with elders. And, he now understands those things. And he says, Western medicine is making tiny steps forward to a more holistic way of caring for folks. but that's not everywhere. And I think, I'm not speaking for him, but I think he might say, it's not because of anything that I learned at school. It's because I learned that from working with the people, spending time with the people, spending time in the community. And that's where, the appreciation of Indigenous healing, family and community, how those pieces are so important to us and is a part of our wellness. It's, it's not, one of his comments in the thesis was that Western medicine really does well is compartmentalized. So I'm going to go over here because I have breast cancer, and we're just going to focus on these components. Nobody's going to ask. It's not, maybe a social worker would ask about how you're doing in the other parts of your life, but there's lots of things that I think can be shared both ways. Another healer also shared some important words that these ways don't have to be they don't have to be adversarial, right? I think there are some ways that they can complement one another, and it's not a matter of, okay, don't do that, but maybe you can do that, but at this time. So it's a different way of looking at it. And I do think there needs to be more conversation between maybe opportunities for learning about Indigenous healing that maybe Western practitioners can participate in.
Definitely. I think that's great points. And I think both can learn a lot. And I think just integrating more Indigenous knowledge within the healthcare system, like you said, can be a more beneficial for the holistic take for care and whatnot. So yeah, that's great. That was our last question. I don't know if you have any last closing remarks before I close the webinar, but I'll hand it over to you.
I just want to say again, Jimmy Wedge, to everyone who came out and the supportive comments and supportive little reactions. I really appreciate that. Thanks so much. And yeah, if you want to reach out, my email is cindyp@nipissingU.ca. So I think it's on the poster as well. I'd be happy to answer questions, or if I don't know the answer, I'll try to help you find someone who knows.
Sorry, we just got one question in. I just overlooked it really quick. Do you mind answering it real quick? Okay. It's how can I, as a non-Indigenous person, ensure that I'm sharing my research in a good way? I know you said to ensure that the work is accessible to community. Do you have any other recommendations?
I think going back and asking, if you're a non-Indigenous person working with an Indigenous community, I think going back and asking, you can go in with some ideas, 3 or 4 things that ideas for sharing the research, but be prepared that maybe they'll accept one of those ideas and give you a few suggestions on how they want that done. I would always encourage the constant conversation. So it's not, it's not enough to say, okay, we have the ethical clearance and we're going to go ahead and we're going to work on this. There needs to be a constant going back and informing, asking for guidance and direction. It should be an ongoing conversation, not ethics and the other parts around that they aren't a one-off.
That's great. Yes, definitely good to check in and kind of get that feedback and working with it instead of trying to make your idea work and whatnot. So I appreciate you answering that. That was our last question. So thank you so much, Cindy. Thank you to all our guests and for joining us today. And we appreciate hearing about the film and also Dr. Cindy Peltier's amazing discussion and presentation. It was great to learn about the different things that Nipissing community is doing for healing and whatnot. So that was really great. And just before we end this webinar, we'd love to bring your attention to our upcoming webinars. We have Pathways to Graduate School Application Support on November 23rd. And then we also have Pathways to Graduate School Indigenous Graduate Funding on December 5th. Please sign up for our webinar at www.learningscircle.ubc.ca. We also have our newsletter. The link will be in the chat. Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you at our next Learning Circle. Lim, thank you.